Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Sally Eaves, CEO of Aspirational Futures and your host for today. A very warm welcome to Be Like Water, how to apply tech trends to get the future you want. I'm going to keep this intro minimal as we have so much to discuss in this hour, really underpinned by the latest TechnoVision framework and more on that later, alongside really tangible use cases and real life stories. Very much a focus here, not on the hype, but on the how of applying technology. And before we dive in, and I'm seeing all the comments already, which is fantastic, I just want to highlight this is very much your discussion. We really want audience questions, we want feedback, and we want this to be really interactive. So without any further ado, let me welcome our superb panel for today. Firstly, Pascal Brier, who is Group Chief Innovation Officer at Capgemini. Welcome to you, Pascal.
Hi, Sally. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. And next we have Mark Esposito, professor, author, entrepreneur, and senior advisor to a number of governments. Welcome, Mark. Great to see you again.
Thank you very much, Sally. Welcome to everybody.
Thank you. And also we have Zhiwei Jiang, CEO of Insights and Data, Global Business Line at Capgemini. A warm welcome to you too, Zhiwei.
Yeah, hello, everyone.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I'm going to dive straight in because so much content area here, which is fantastic. So I think starting with you, Pascal, to set the scene, as Capgemini's Group Chief Innovation Officer, what's your perspective on how tech-driven innovation has a role to play in helping organizations adapt to change?
Well, Sally, let me maybe start with a small story, very short one. A year ago exactly, same week, March last year, the aeronautics companies throughout the world were posting stellar results. And at that time, there was a general consensus that this industry was bound to grow for the next 20 years because the underlying market of it, which is the passenger traffic, was growing at a steady 5% per year. So everybody was predicting that the fleet of planes would double within the next 15 years. And the key question for that industry was the capacity to ramp up. Now, this year, the passenger traffic has collapsed by 65%. All those same companies are posting their results, and their level of revenue has gone back to what it was between 2010 and 2014, according to the companies. And we're talking here about some of the best managed companies in the world in an industry which is seen by many as a role model. So what I mean here is that obviously not all of us have been hit that hard by what has happened, but none of us have been left untouched, for sure. And the question, after the two phases that we've just gone through, the first one being, I would say, resist, the second one being respond, is what will we be doing next, especially in the way we're going to build our systems going forward? Because we think that adjust will not be enough as an answer. So I would like to maybe look at what did we learn during this pandemic. And I would offer four things. The first one, and you will excuse my French, is that S happens. Problems are bound to occur. I mean, whether we like it or not, but we should expect the unexpected. And if you look at this year, last year, 2020, not only has it been a complex year for us, but it's been a record year for cyber attacks. So as a former French president would say, it's not that only that problems would occur, but they come by pack. They fly as a squadron, as he said. And that's, I would say, the new normal for us. The second thing, and I will not insist on it, is that we've seen that agility has become prevalent. This is the number one word. The third one is that we rediscovered, and that might be good news, that IT is the business. I mean, maybe we forgot about it, but during pandemic, as IT has been key to sustain business, and it's been a key enabler for us really to sustain business. And I think it's both a revenge to some extent for the CIOs and the CDOs. It's at the same time an opportunity for the future, but we may see it as well as a huge challenge in terms of expectation for all of us as professionals of building IT systems. And my last comment would be that we come out of this pandemic knowing now that every business is a technology business. And I would just like to take the sentence from the new appointed CEO from Renault. His first interview in the French press was, and I'd like to quote it as he said it, "We need to be a technology company that integrates car and not a car company that integrates technology as it is today." So when we look at the next phase, very quickly and to start the discussion, post-pandemic, I think we can no longer see change decoupled from technology. And this is why in technology, we said that to some extent, digital transformation is something like a pleonasm. Like, you know, the oldest among us used to talk about multimedia PC. And by essence, all PCs were multimedia. And I would claim that by essence, all transformation would be digital at some point. The second thing as a learning exercise is that I think we should fully revisit the way we build to last. You know, for years, us as IT professionals or engineering professionals, we have built our system with a view and a focus of being rigid, strong, not breaking. And with the current speed of changes and the level of volatility and unexpected items, I would say, we can simply not imagine being agile and responsive enough. So I think we need to switch. We need to switch and augment ourselves with the idea that going forward, we need to build fluidity. We need to build with a can break attitude, knowing that it's going to break at some point, with the easy to rebuild mentality. And that's the overall thing that we wanted to relay as a message within TechnoVision. That's why we use this theme of be like water, okay? Because change by nature is what should guide us in the way we build our systems going forward. And if I may close with it, I would say the question going forward is not really about how should we adapt to change, but it's much more how do we become part of the change in the way we build our systems.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. What a great introduction to the discussion. Thank you for that. And really feels to me that ambidexterity really coming to the fore there, not only as organizations and the various dimensions there, but as individuals coping with this change as well. So I know we're going to come on to that a little bit later, but that's a fantastic way to set the scene. And thinking about that as well, again, going back to the framework, uncertainty squared, I think you've really foregrounded that current era that we're in there with your examples. And maybe that leads nicely on to Mark, actually, as a first question. If we drill down into some of the technology breakthroughs, you know, areas such as AI and also IoT and the unexpected change potential, but also complexity that brings, what are you seeing in terms of key barriers and also enablers that we can really leverage these for their maximum opportunity?
Thanks so much, Sally, and it's great to start building from where Pascal really left us so far. A big conversation that I think we can have right now is in which way do we see this changing, profoundly changing the expectation of the market in the foreseeable future. I would say there are a few trends that they operate as overarching trends, and then we have a number of different sub-trends that really are describing a bit more of the behavior that these trends are really shaping up. What we are learning from this specific period of history is that volatility and the tremors attached to this are going to be much more normalized in the next few years. Therefore, our ability to use economic modeling to determine where to go next will be but diluted and decreased by the day. So we have to start thinking about a different way of mapping and thinking about the future, a bit more related to how the future really is. We tend to be a bit obsessed by extrapolating data from the past to try to imagine that the future will look a little bit like that. But as there is no data from the future, that becomes particularly true when the trends ahead of us are very volatile. From a financial perspective, we have seen a significant form of redistribution of the financial capital and the assets. So we have unavoidable roll-ups that really changed the nature of assets around the world. This is driven once by technology disrupting rapidly, and of course, the brick and mortar becoming less and less fluid as a consequence of the pandemic. When we're looking then in technology trends, we can see that things like automation and artificial intelligence, as you were introducing, have definitely seen an acceleration. In a conversation with a senior partner in one of the larger consulting companies, I was told that in average 6 to 7 years of acceleration has been reported across their client, this large consulting company. And this is not necessarily just a trend that we're reading on newspaper. It's really that organizations have to rapidly adapt. And adaptation through technology comes in a much natural form than if we have to do this in terms of incremental. So that level of exponential leapfrogging that we did needs to be built also in terms of the culture of the organizations. And I think later on we'll equally discuss about it in terms of what is to expect. Why did we title this conference as Be Like Water? There's a lot of references to that. I would say when AI and automation have created an entirely different paradigm, on the more brick and mortar, but supported by technology, a decentralization of the supply chains have really seen a completely different form of production. So even if that production is a physical production, we actually are envisioning a production that is going to create a paradigm between the localization and some of the most traditional global supply chains. So these are interesting trends that we see rising more and more. I would say if we go a little bit more into the specific of what I see as a behavioral dimension that are kind of like emerging from these trends, we have talked about Be Like Water because we do believe that in anti-fragility is the nature of the resilience that the organization will have to acquire from now on. More and more of the conversation of resilience is currently being discussed than ever before. Resilience used to be a soft concept. Now it's becoming almost like a hardcore strategy for organizations. This is a trend that is empowered by technology, but not just technology. So this is extremely interesting techno-humanistic environment that I think we are creating more and more. From I think anti-fragility as a concept, we're moving more and more into the idea that as innovation is becoming part of everyday culture, it's more of a mindset. Innovation doesn't have to come with a department or simply with an allocated set of resources. We have a lot of open innovation solutions that are now empowering millions of people around the world to really rapidly use technology as a way of advancing their value creation. But the whole idea about frugal innovation that back in time was just a book and a concept and some funny videos about the Jugaad innovation that was emerging, for example, from a country in Southeast Asia. Today it's much more of a practice that we understand, mainly because many organizations have to rapidly innovate without necessarily having the research and development capital required for the more conventional process of innovation. So say frugal innovation has been another phenomenal opportunity that we've seen in the spirit of history that is there to stay. When we talk about frugal innovation, we talk about a form of tribalism or tribal communities that are now innovating locally. So if before the large innovation was coming primarily from the Western Hemisphere, today innovation is much more of a widespread conversation. We have this extremely interesting decentralized and federative model of innovation coming from grassroots community. So tribalism in this specific sense is becoming very interesting. I see this where I'm currently calling from in Dubai, where we start having an ecosystem of local innovators that we didn't really have before. We start noticing this also with the capital coming from a country like Israel, where the relationship is normalized recently. So around the world, we start noticing different kind of trends of this localization that is coming with, on one side, innovation, on the other side, a much more self-deterministic sense of communities, the way we haven't seen for quite some time. My final reflection as we go back to the financial conversation is when I was in Davos in 2020, I was asked the question during an interview with Thomson Reuters whether I would see ESG becoming a predominant factor for 2020. At the time, my answer was quite conservative. I would say yes, but still it would take some time before ESG is actually shaping up. Within 12 months, we have seen a major leap of ESG. Today, ESG is discussed in every single major financial institution. We have a number of investors that are rapidly looking at ESG metrics to determine how to position their investment. There's also one way to think that ESG is an accelerant to sustainability. And I see this as an opportunity like we've never seen before. Just to summarize, a combination of overarching trends plus some extremely interesting behavioral factors are changing the landscape where I see the trends moving. It's the first time that I see this convergence at the pace in which we're currently experiencing this.
Excellent overview there, and I love that point that you raised at the end. Well, so many points, but the ESG one, personally on that particular front, what I'm liking now as well is not only it becoming more mainstream, but that quest for transparency, making comparable metrics between different reporting around ESG. We're seeing a real kind of acceleration on quality and comparisons and transparency on that area, which is only going to drive up quality. So I'm really, really excited to see that. And I just wanted to go to the audience for a second, because there's a number of questions coming in around skills implications of all the trends we're talking about. One example of this is from Pavan, who's a solution architect at Pepsi. And he wants to know, from Capgemini's perspective, as a tech giant, do you see the change in technologies affecting upskilling strategy due to the pandemic? I didn't know if anybody would like to come in specifically on that one. I think it's a great point. Maybe Pascal from the Capgemini perspective?
Yes, if you could repeat the question, just I
No
missed
problem at all.
the end of the sentence.
This is from Pepsi, from Pavan.
Yeah.
And he's basically asking about the skills implications. So as a tech giant, did you see any change in technologies upskilling strategy due to the pandemic?
Well, one thing for sure is that, as Mark just said, the pandemic has changed the pace with which we need to look at this skills problem going forward. Some of the technologies that we mentioned in our report, which was seen, which I would say an horizon or midterm horizon, are now becoming short-term horizon. So I would say that the quest we've seen, for example, for skilling around AI and I would say more agile infrastructure or low-code type of applications are many domains in which the quest for talents would be higher than it's been ever before. And there are obviously two ways to try to solve this. The first one is to look at the market and try to find those talents as being available on the market. But we know it's not the case. If they were, they would already been taken by some of the companies there. So there will be a huge pressure being put on companies on how you can internally skill or reskill towards those new type of technologies, including the way you build things. Maybe we're going to touch around it later on, but things like DevOps already and what we mentioned as StratOps, for example, in our report, will be different ways of looking at how you build systems, how you manage systems, and that will require, obviously, a lot of skills and a lot of reskilling sometime.
Absolutely. Great point there. And I would also add smart learning. So we talk a lot about smart technology, but things like helping people facilitate their learning better. So things like understanding metacognition, how you learn and what your learning style preference is. And technology can also help identify patterns in that through AI. So I think that's something to look out for as well. We can come back to that a little bit later on in the conversation. But I think I'll go now to Zhiwei. I'd love to bring in your perspective, particularly drilling into data. I think, we've already set this context, really, I would say, around the 4 Vs in many senses. So we've got the volume of data is growing, velocity, veracity, variety of data as well. But obviously, this can only create value when it's filtered appropriately, when it's shared and collaborated on, and we've got flexible platform architectures. And I kind of want to bring in data lake here as a little bit of a metaphor, really, for our topic today. But I'd love to kind of drill into this more with you, Zhiwei. And I know you recently said data is the new smart energy. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit more and tell us how it more relates to the theme of being like water.
Yeah, sure. So if you look at data as the new, it's a bit of a cliche. People been using that phrase for at least 10 years. We were in the leadership call with our insights and data VPs. There's actually lots of Bruce Lee fans. And how about data is, they be like water on this. And then the more you think about it, it probably makes sense, right? So if you think about from today's economy is a very much a data-driven economy, information economy. And also, if you think about, what Mark and Pascal was saying at the beginning, how do you build an economy that's built to last? The data is probably more relevant than oil. So the second point is then why water is the energy. So if you see from the energy point of view where you can both consume and provide at the same time, that's probably a more interesting concept. So in this way, data provides water-like capabilities in terms of making split-informed decisions, predict what's going to happen, and prescribe how we're going to achieve what we want to achieve. So it's always moving, always changing, just like water, right? So it's just like what we see. It's the values in its adoption rather than it's actually what's the value inside. So again, that's more like water. And the third comment is, so why do we put a smartness in there, right? So why smart? So this is where what you said at the beginning is this is where AI comes in, this analytics comes in, the intelligent automation comes in. If you look at what's happened on the edge of the IT operations in the fields, this is making this whole how we adapt and respond to business and we automate. This is where the smartness comes in. So that's why we call it the new phrase. Data is the new smart energy. Hopefully, when the audience picking up and you can retweet, you can put all the hashtags in. Hopefully, this phrase will fly.
Absolutely brilliant overview there. Thank you so much for that. I think I'll go back now to Pascal to drill a little bit more into TechnoVision. And its aim, I know, is to really help organizations to build and develop a technology business, as we've been alluding to throughout the conversation so far. What's your advice to the audience to advance in these volatile times as smoothly and as practically as possible? And just relating that to some of the questions we're having coming through the stream, definitely that education area. I'm seeing so many comments on upskilling and the role of technology around that. So just to kind of filter that in as well.
I think my first advice would be, and I know it's easy to say and much more difficult to do, is get applied with technology. Many companies, in fact, stay away from technology and they think, this is the problem of the CIO, the CDO, or some very specific teams. What we've seen over the last month really shows that, at least in some countries and some parts of the world, there is an under-education of many CXOs around the technology part of their business. So there is a huge, we were just talking about skilling. I would say there is some skilling effort to be done towards CXOs in understanding the challenge with technology. All the more as if we, in the future, go to this be like water type of organization, the assumption is that at some points, problems will occur and systems will break and we'll have to be adapt to that. I think our leaders need to understand that. They need to agree to that philosophy. Otherwise, it's going to be always a strike like, why did the system break? Why does it stop? So if you're betting everything on fluidity and the fact that you can adjust and repair and sync things, that needs, a state of mind which has to be shared among the leaders within the company. So I would say the first things to do is really try to sell this idea of agility and adaptation, if I may say so, to change, and how technology plays a role into that. So that would be there are obviously many things to do, but I would say let's start first with making sure we do the proper education about the fact that every business is a technology business, so we need to get to get applied with technology and understand technology.
I couldn't agree more with that. And on the education point, almost helping people to have that toolbox of skill sets, that depth and breadth to dip into, because I think being comfortable with a state of continual change is the future. You know, that expression, a continual learning for life. I don't think it's ever been more important as it is at the moment, and helping people kind of guide through that process, I think is hugely important. So investment in that alongside the technologies. Thank you very much, Pascal. That's great. I think I'll go back to you, Mark, now, if that's okay. Again, we spoke a bit, great introduction about technology trends there. But for all the things you're seeing at the moment across the market, across different organizations, what do you find the most intriguing?
Thanks for this, Sally. So actually, one of the things I find most intriguing is the idea of the digital global mindset, right? The fact that we're now not only looking at people in terms of their expertise, and I'm trying to also connect it to the question you asked to Pascal before. And as I'm an educator like yourself, right, I'm equally, of course, thinking about the role education has in all of this. So I find that the idea of the digital global mindset quite interesting. I think is a way of mitigating challenges and realizing the opportunity we have in this specific period of history. I think is redesigning the requirement for new types of global leaders, is the idea of new kind of managers, new kind of regulator, and is this integration about the private, the public, the not-for-profit, and what is called also the fourth sector. And where it's interesting is the kind of characteristics that come with this digital global mindset that are really captured by some of the TechnoVision trends that we see. I'm always interested in the undercurrents, right? So from individuals that are capable of taking initiative, to people that think of education as a lifelong prospect rather than just related to degrees, to this idea of the STEM, right? So where we have in advanced data analysis and mathematical skills, but also very much versed into emotional intelligence and the ability to be entrepreneurial, adaptable, empathetic, problem solver. These are some of the things that really comes to my mind. I think the idea that we are building on a generation of people that are much more humanized or human-centric, but they're equally comfortable with data and technology is a very different kind of profile from when I went to school and when I went through either my background, which is in economics, or people that were going, for example, through social sciences, right? We used to have silo and partitions and verticals for people to feel very different. Today, this much more generalized perspective of the digital global mindset really redesign not only education, but skill set, but equally the hiring, the HR of the entire organization. Who do we bring to our organizations? Do we bring the engineering profile or the accounting profile that used to dominate in the 20th century, or do we build much more I would say, functional jobs and transfunctional positions? So this is what really intrigues me, Sally, right now, this idea of the digital global mindset, because it goes into the fact that digital identity is going to become more and more of an important trend in the years to come.
I couldn't agree more. We've got a very shared kind of view on that. Absolutely. And it's interesting as well, looking at all the comments, this whole kind of thing around continuous learning is coming through really strongly. Stefano, thank you for your comments on that. Really, really interesting links you shared as well. And for me as well, I come from a change management background, and there's a concept around continuous integration, continuous deployment. So that agile approach to development and change, I think we're seeing the same thing within education and skills build at the moment as well. So really interesting areas there, some great links being shared. So it's fantastic to see how.
I think we lost Sally. I don't know if
it's not you, no, it's not you, Pascal. It's
okay.
Actually, yeah, I think we
So we
lost.
lost.
Yeah, me too. I was trying to wonder whether you guys were moving or not.
So yeah, we all ask. So maybe we shall continue with that, Sally, on that way. I think one of the key challenge we're going to have for that is that obviously there is something like an avalanche of technologies. I don't know what you see, but the key question for all of us and all the companies, all our customers would be, what shall we do first? And they're going to be very complex trade-off. I mean, if you've missed the live wave of technology and you're late on cloud, you're late on AI, you're late on cyber, you're late on, I don't know, embedded software and software engineering, and on low-code of our application, that's going to be really a challenging thing. And we don't have to, I would say, undermine the efforts that it's going to require. And I think, as Capgemini, for example, we have a mission to support and help our customers make some choices and really find out for some priorities on what they should be doing next. I don't know what you think of it, or whether you would like to rebound on this.
I would actually comment on this, Mark and Pascal. I think if I look at how I was running this insights and data business, right? So you have to look through 3-4 different lenses. If you look through the lens of the technology, clearly we are the innovation business, we're at the scaling business. So if you think about all this edge computing over AI, that's an innovation business. If you look at the platform, we're scaling business. So if you look at it from technology point of view. If you look at from business point of view, if you look at client point of view, is what's the value, what's the business model change on this? But then if you look at from the people angle, right? So if you look at insights and data, we operate some between 20 to 25,000 people. What we try to drive is as a learning organization. So this is where we come in, is you have to look at learning, innovation, and the business value, all this in a seamless fashion in this context. So that's why I like what you said, Mark, this digital mindset. But this is how, for people like me running, insights and data business, How do you tie those together? So that's the way I sort of look at it, because you have to almost drive this triangle, the flywheel, spiral up all the time. So that's the way I tend to look at it.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Sally?
I think Sally join us again. Yes.
Excellent. It's
Welcome
always
back,
the way, isn't it? You can tell it's live, everyone. So we're truly live here. Thank you for covering for me there for a second. I appreciate it.
Sally, if he reassures you, as you froze in the screen, the three of us equally froze, but for different reasons.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. Well, as I say, live, everybody here, truly live. So this is what happens, but well covered by our team here. Thank you. I'll go back to you, Mark, now, if that's okay, for another question. I love this. So let's take a time machine for a second. Let's look ahead to 2025. Let's focus on technology and the key technologies there. What do you think is going to be making most impact if we flash forward by a few more years?
If you give me this wonderful, power of the time machine, I will, of course, be very arbitrary and choose the one that I think is most fascinating for me. The one technology that I see applied to agriculture, the whole idea of agri-tech, hydroponic, aeroponics, it's been around for quite some time. I was writing myself about this years ago, and I realized I was almost like feeling quite far from the mainstream. Today, if I'm looking at the effort that many organizations and country are making towards the use of technology in agriculture, that's quite interesting. I was also looking at some of the interesting data that supports this entire sustainability revolution in a much more substantial way than what we've seen before. And by looking at how technology that are going to work in the field of climate mitigation, we really are adding trillions of dollars to the economy in ways that are quite silent, and we don't see this. So I would say, if I had to pick up one trend that I can play with until 2025, I'd love to see a much more visible integration of agri-tech in agriculture, because it's one of the areas where we need important needs. And that's where technology company can really help. In creating bridges that are also culturally important to create, because historically these were communities that were not resorting to technology that easily. They were resorting to mechanization, but not necessarily to technology. And today we can do pattern, we can do forecast, we can look at the irrigation trends, we can have smart devices. A combination of AI, IoT, and smart devices, I think, is really where I see the future. So thanks for giving me this magical bubble where I could be in 2025 for a moment.
No problem at all. I needed it just now as well, didn't I? Absolutely. And Holly there in the feed as well has just responded to your point there, talking about vertical farming and the benefits that can bring. I think there's a great point there as well, particularly for city centre space, etc. I think is a great one. I've also got another question through on a different channel for Zhiwei. And this is from a Capgemini colleague, Beepin. How can we make data behave more like water, be more adaptable to change? We need to do so much with data to ensure it's fit for its purpose.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think when we look at this, when we drive from insights and data, you probably need three things. You probably need three things. You need to look at how you source the data. So from the data sourcing point of view, what's the right approach, right? Whether it's a real time, what's a batch, what's a micro batch, whether it's through Splunk and all these technology and that sort of stuff. So this is sort of the data sourcing. That's less, so over the last 10, 15 years, that's sort of been changing in terms of speed, in terms of velocity and that sort of stuff. The second thing is that you look at, how do you consume the technology on this, right? So if you look at the consumption side, if you look at left and right, if you look at the right side, how do you consume the technology? This is the way things are getting more and more interesting. This is the way when you apply AI, it's no longer BI, it's no longer dashboard, it's more AI, it's more advanced analytics, try to predict, try to prescribe what's going to happen on this. So that's the sort of the consumption side of it. This is where we bring AI in. The most important part is actually the piece in the middle, whether you call this black box, whether you call data mesh, we call with data cloud, you call data platform, whatever you call them, sort of thing. This is where the most scaling effect comes in. Because you have to be open-minded about what other data you want to blend your own data with, right? So that's the concept with things like the data exchange people are pushing. And the more you think about it is the more data bring more insights. Hence the concept of the data, data be like more water and sort of thing. And then you look at how do you drive that because you have the platform, hence this energy. So I think, yes, you have to look at the sourcing side, you have to look at the consumption side, but the most important is the piece in the middle, the black piece in the middle, because increasingly we try to push the data platform, data mesh, data cloud.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And I'm going to go back to Mark, actually Pascal, for this one, if that's okay. Because just relating to some of the things that were spoken about, particularly from Mark, around some of the more social impact outcomes, what do you see the role of IT in improving social inclusion, addressing skills gaps, and addressing wider social responsibilities?
Wow, this is a very wide question. Obviously.
No pressure.
I mean, I guess it's the right one, because we cannot at the same time say or tell the world that technology is at the center of the cornerstone of everything we build, and every business is a tech business, and not look obviously at the I would say social implication or inclusion that the extensive use of technology is creating for our society. This is a complex question, because this is always a balance that you need to strike between, I would say, man and machine. When you look at how the world is going towards, I mean, let's take 3 technologies: AI, autonomous systems, and connectivity. The power of those 3 technologies, and all the more if you're putting them together. I mean, full AI system that can drive autonomous, full AI platform that can drive autonomous systems in a world with unlimited connectivity. That creates a world with fascinating opportunities from a technical point of view. But at the same time, that can look pretty scary for many of us. I mean, if we are among that revolution, if we are part of it, if we are like water and we flow along this river, that's okay. Now, if you stay on the bench and you just look at the river and you're not part of it, then you think it's a speedy one. It goes too fast and you don't get it. So I think it's very important. And I was talking before about the role of CXOs going forward and the need for them to understand technology. Then we could extend it now to a level above that, which is that, I mean, to a political point of view now, technology has, and it becomes something like, you know, the essence of the economic development of many countries. So the understanding of technologies and how we can respond to it will be crucial going forward. And that would be unfair, I would say, to let companies decide on what's good and what's not good. So obviously we have our role to play. And, you know, Capgemini is one of the most, well, it's considered to be one of the most ethical company in the world. And we strive to really make sure that we apply technology for good. But I think it's a generic or a general problem for everybody to look at this inclusion thing between technology, because one thing for sure, technology will not stop. So we'll have to find ways either to adapt, but if you adapt, there's always, I would say, how can I say that? It's a harmful process. Okay, so it's better to get ready for it. So we need to find a way to make people understand that we will not solve our climate issues without technology. So that's good to use technology for solving most of our climate issues. But if we use technology, that's going to change the way we do things, and we will have to understand it, and we will have to adapt, and obviously to trust that it's going into the right direction.
Absolutely. I think that trust in tech point there is hugely important, and some great comments from Dr. Nigel in the feed there, talking about the role of AI and analytics to actually monitor social impact change as well. And certainly on your point on climate, Pascal, some great work I've seen about, you know, wildfire prevention, for example, poaching identification. There's some interesting projects literally happening here and now in that area that we can share more details on afterwards as well. And I'm just thinking, as a nice segue here to you, Mark, around really this overall shift that we're seeing from more of a service to a purpose economy. So where do you see us going next in terms of creating, well, I would say, shared value, shared stakeholder value, and achieving that wider social impacts of an organization? I know we both believe that's incredibly important. I just want to see your perspective on that and how to make that a reality.
So, Sally, try to attach this also to the conversation on the human capital, which is so important, to also the conversation Pascal and Zhiwei were having, right? It is the idea that, first of all, we'll start looking at how do we retain and actually attract talent that will no longer look in through the traditional lens of a pedigree or the similarity bias, where everybody pretty much looks the same, or the idea of this group of power that we're mainly attracting the same graduates from the same school. I think this is where we really start creating purpose in the degree of the human capital, because we want to see human capital as an asset, and we want to understand that equally like we think about return on investment for physical assets, we can think of return on human capital in the same way. So the degree of investment on people, I think, will be critical for us to understand purpose in a much more transversal way. In a more macro level, we have seen a transformation towards for purpose that is actually unseen before. We estimate roughly about 10% of organization in the world already driven by purpose or for purpose explicitly. We have seen a reshuffling of the governance of board of directors to try to really meet the needs of a for purpose organization. And I think, going back to the conversation we're having with ESG, if we play this right, we start having investor playing according to the rules of ESG, which means also incentives and dividends will look very different in the future. So if we start thinking about value creation on longer perspectives, the only way value really becomes sustained. And if we start realigning the incentive model, both in terms of design, but equally in terms of really economic incentives, and redesigning the purpose of a board, I think we'll see more and more of our organization going back to the original mission, which was a mission driven by meeting important needs. This is, I think, where the conversation Pascal was making before is particularly important. Technology today is not only a means to efficiency, it's a collective design of what we want to achieve as a society. We can do what we could never do before, which is the great sides, the upside of the story. The downside is that sometimes we still think technology is an inanimate object, but it actually has a lot of value, what we are bringing to the market, because it really represents the cultural mindset more than what we think. So realigning ourselves towards what we said before, the digital mindset, driven by meeting important needs, bridging problems with technology and making sure this technology is becoming scalable, and working on the educational dimension, where we are disrupting these silos of elitist pedigree model, but we're looking at transversal skills across the organizations. I think we're going to build a much more purposeful organization, so to say. To finish on this, I think when we are hearing the World Economic Forum talking about the shift to stakeholder capitalism, I think this is what they mean. They mean about as a model that is working larger than the sum of the parts, not necessarily transactional, but something a bit more aspirational as well.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I actually think the whole pandemic experience has helped accelerate the shift towards purpose. I think people have had that opportunity to reflect and reframe and reimagine what the future looks like. And that alignment between personal values, professional ones, that increasing hybridity. People want to work for, work with, advocate, buy from organizations who have got that alignment with what you believe in personally. So I do think this is huge, and I'm just doing some research at the moment, which kind of early kind of headline is that the organizations that have genuinely committed to things around ESG, for example, have actually been more resilient and have evolved, and all the ethos of Be Like Water, they've demonstrated that and have come out in a very different picture to others. So that's kind of a very high level kind of review of what that data goes into, but that'll be more of that coming soon. So I could not agree more. I think maybe just drawing on one point you were mentioning there around human capital and kind of shifting of skills. A question here for Zhiwei. If we're betting ahead around data-driven, data-powered organizations and AI first, which seems to make sense for many companies, how do you think we best preserve and manage quickly changing roles of humans amongst all this technology change? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one, Zhiwei.
That's actually one of the 37 trends that we emphasized in I guess the ones called a power to the people. I think there's 2 or 3 different dimensions to look at this, right? One is, if you think about the data needs to be used and owned in the right place where it's created or where it's being used. And at the same time, we have to enable people to use the data for the purpose, for the mission. And then it requires a platform, which I said at the beginning, it requires an architecture, requires standards, AI ethics, and this or that. But the other sort of the most important thing is when you're building up the technology trend, the people side of it, which we call upscaling side of it, need to actually bring along to the same speed. In some way, is if you're assuming the actual technology is running X speed, that the people upscaling probably need to run 2x or 3x speed. So that's why when I look at my own organization, as I said, we have about 25,000 people within the insights data business. We're running things like, AI Academy to make sure that we bring the people like this level accordingly. So we have this cadets and the gurus, AI captains, make sure you train all these people. But again, just I want to go back to the point that I think is a very important point that the market raised. It's not just the technology, because when you get into the AI, when you get to the data space, it's also the ethics standards, the human, the unconscious bias need to be removed accordingly as well. So that's the sort of thing we try to pushing on that. But again, this is where what comes in is, I guess, power to the people. So that's the way I look at it.
Absolutely brilliant. That's a great segue there. I'm seeing some lovely My Tech Trend sharing going on related to those 37 TechnoVision trends coming out in the feed. So some fantastic examples there. So thank you everyone for that. So I think it'd be great for the last kind of 10 minutes of our conversation to drill in that a little bit more and to explore together what our favorite trend is each, and maybe explaining it at more of a tweet level, why we feel that way about each one. So I'll go first on that one. So for me, and I put my hands up, I come from a tech background in telco, so I've got a bit of a natural bias for this, but my trend is going to be use the 5G force, Luke. So that's very much in the We Collaborate container of the framework. And I wanted to thanks to Monica Gupta, expert in residence, who's really presented her thoughts on that, and I thought it was excellent. So summing that up in a tweet, which is quite difficult, I would say 5G speed, security, reliability, and low latency is the enabler for emergent tech integration. It enables edge AI/ML, AR, VR, and real-time image video streaming, but it also enables democratization of accessibility too. And I'm going to make a tiny thread for my tweet here, but basically it's the hub of the wheel. It enables so many use cases. And I would say, thinking about We Are Water, it's the conduit to elasticity. And if I had more time, I would also add in network slicing, device density, power efficiency, and going back to change management processes and how that adapts to human behavior, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and continuous investment in learning. So it's very be like water. Mark, over to you for your thoughts on this one.
Great. So this is the part that I've been waiting for as I get excited about these trends. So my trends would be adapt first and what's our story. So if I had to think of a tweet about that first is really about thinking about moving adaptability from afterthought to prime time. And if somebody asks me, what does it mean? The other tweet would be, we want to start learning market validation from the market and reverse engineer the process back in the organization, because that's how we're really learning in dynamic anthropic environments. So I would say that's one of my favorite in terms of adaptability as a new competitive advantage. My second one in terms of what's our story goes back to what I was sharing with you before. I think we really have to start thinking about using technology to augment people rather than thinking the people should augment technology. This human-centric is not just the lip service. It's really where we would like technology to go. It's using the power of technology to improve the quality of life. And we now have a significant opportunity that we never had before. We just have to understand that global challenges can only be addressed by global responses, even if they're going to be executed at the more local level. But this is another tweet that most likely I will run out of characters. I will need to do a follow-up, but that are the two trends that I absolutely love, Sally.
I love that. Definitely, this has got all the thread potential in the world, hasn't it? It could run and run this one. Zhiwei, I'd love to hear from you for your chosen trend, or maybe two trends.
Yeah, I already picked one. One is, as I said, the power to the people, right? So we need to bring the technology, bring the data skills along with innovation together with people. The second one I pick is the data apart together. The reason I pick it is also kind of interesting, right? One is apart and the together. The apart part is when you look at the data as how organized, I guess, whether it's in a silo mode or, or in federated mode, there's a design and a balance. The other one is also when you look at apart, then you look at together, is the whole concept around we should be pushing these days is around how do you leverage the data exchange? How do you leverage the data mesh? How do you leverage data cloud? So that's the sort of thing is that you have a platform to bring all these data sources apart and together into the data platform. So that would be my second choice.
Fantastic. Great suggestions there. Thank you. And over to you, Pascal, for your chosen trend.
Yeah, if I may, and if you allow me, just before giving you my answer, I would like to start by thanking the 30 experts of residence, as you mentioned them, who, under the leadership of Ron Toledo and Gunnar Menzel, have built those 37 technology trends. I think they've done a fantastic job of making them easy to understand, easy to grasp, and very enjoyable to read. So my favorite one, apart from Ada First, which Mark already covered, because I really agree that without any adaptation, anything you say then would be very complex to implement. I would insist on the one which is the most difficult for a French guy to spell, which is trust. But I really believe, going forward, post-pandemic, trust will be at the center of everything. If trust was important before pandemic, it's going to be even more important after pandemic. We even see, all the questions we have around vaccine. Should I trust it? Should I go for it? Even in times where there should be no question on whether we should go for vaccine because that's the outcome of the pandemic. We already have some question about it because people just start questioning how can it be done in such a short time, and is it really reliable, and all those things. I think we're going to get the same kind of thing with this avalanche of technologies and with the pace which is changing now. So we really need to make sure that we spend enough time building that trust so that we can go smoothly and develop it. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very long process and a very, very painful process as well. So trust would be my favorite one.
Excellent, and well articulated as well. That's fantastic. And I think we've got 5 minutes before the end. So I think what we'll do is perhaps if you take a minute each, just as a takeaway from your perspective of your key thoughts from our conversation today, or maybe something you've just not had time to cover that you really wanted to get out. So maybe going to you, Mark, first on that one.
Great, thanks so much. So I think my major takeaway from the conversation that we had, and also working with you, Sally, with Pascal and Zhiwei, is that the analogy of water is not just a nice one to have. It's really the idea that water, it has to inspire because of the constant degree of transformation the water undergoes. No matter in which form it is, right? And I think organization for many years were designed and directed under this Taylorism, in which the pyramidal structure defined power at the top, and everything else was about reassigning responsibility according to the function. But this is how factories used to work. Now, today, markets are much more closer to networks than anything else. So how do we redesign organization around network? I think is a key idea. There are many people that start looking at complexity as a way of understanding that organizations are complex entities. The market is complex. It's not just about simplifying what cannot be simplified, but just about redesigning structure so we can really undertake the amount of pressure ahead of us. If we are able to manage this, I think that 2020 onwards will be a time that we will remember for many reasons, but also time where we're looking at the architecture of this new economic infrastructure that sees so much more fledgling than the one we had before.
Very well put. Absolutely agree. And Zhiwei, over to you. Just a final thought would be fantastic.
Sure. So I have two ideas on this. I think the first one is when I watch the chat windows, I can see two main themes popping up. So I just respond to that. One is obviously people looking for jobs. So for sure we're hiring. So please find us. Please reach out to us. We're hiring data engineers. We're hiring AI engineers, data scientists, and so forth. So please reach out to us. The other thing which I think is actually make me proud and actually in some way I think motivated and inspired is that there are lots of comments about trust, ethics, climate change, sustainability in this chat window. This is great, right? Because people, I completely agree with a lot of the comments. It's more than just the technology, how to use data, how to use AI. there's a larger societal impact. So I think that this is sort of, when I'm watching these chat windows sort of thing, this actually make me think and reflect more on this. So yeah, it's a great session. It's also inspiring and I guess in some way actually motivating as well.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I've had some messages from a couple of schools that are actually tuning in to this as well, and they're comparing it to a couple of programs. I'm like Stranger Things, and they've even given analogies around the acrobat being 2 dimensions, the flea that can go up and down, and how that's kind of their take on what we're talking about here in terms of fluidity. So I love that. It's such a kind of depth and breadth of audience. So thank you for picking up on that. I think that's brilliant. And finally, Pascal, your closing thoughts before we end.
So 1 minute and 3 ideas, maybe. One, technology is here to stay. It's a chance and an opportunity for most of us to develop our business, but we have to recognize the fact that it is complex. It is what it is. It is complex. 2, don't get lost, don't fear it, and don't stop. This is not the way to go. I mean, getting away from technology because we fear it or because it's too complex will not lead to any success. So the question is about how do you embrace it and how do you work on it, if I may say so. So I would offer that once you have this adaptation type of mind, go mile by mile. So find a way to really get into it. That's why we built this TechnoVision report, just to try to offer a way. I'm not saying this is the only one, but it's to try to offer a way to, at the same time, make it simpler than it is maybe, but also to give some ways to have a stepped approach into these complex worlds of technology. But that's for sure, I mean, the best way to get out on I would say safely out of the crisis from today and the one that are bound to happen at some point.
Absolutely. There's a lovely comment here from Dr. Nigel Wright, who says the only limit is imagination. I absolutely love that. And that feels a very kind of fitting way to end our conversation. So with 1 minute to go, I think it leaves it to me to say thank you very much to Pascal, to Mark, and to Zhiwei for your contributions today. I've loved it. And thank you to everyone for your fantastics and really sustained level of questions that have come through, and for all the My Tech Trend shares that I'm seeing as well. It's brilliant to see that. And again, echo the thoughts. I love the fact that we're really delving into culture, to skills, to sustainability, to green tech. I think it's fantastic to see the interest in that area. And from all of us, I think we really hope that today's session has helped to stimulate some new dialogue, help inspire, to guide and build and shape business into the future, unlock the value of technology, and move beyond adapting to change to becoming the change. So we're closing Be Like Water for now, but I hope it's just the start of this conversation. We're going to share additional links to resources such as a TechnoVision framework, so you can dive in more deeper directly. Thank you to everyone. Like I say, I've really loved this, and it's been such a pleasure. So bye for all of us for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Sally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.